The movie opens in New York City, where we meet a couple, Jessica and Evan, who are returning home after watching a play. However, when they arrive at their apartment, they're horrified to see it completely ransacked. It turns out they've been robbed, and to make matters worse, the robber is still there and holds them at gunpoint while demanding money and jewelry. A terrified Jessica has no choice but to hand over her wallet and the engagement ring, after which the robber finally runs away. Shortly after, the police are called, so Evan's cop friend, Tyler, also arrives and tries to help in the investigation. Jessica then asks him to be honest and asks what are the chances of actually catching the robber, to which Tyler responds that it's very low. That night, Evan is in his bed sleeping, when he suddenly realizes that Jessica is not next to him. He gets up to look for her, and soon finds her packing boxes. It turns out that the entire situation has left Jessica extremely shaken, and she no longer wants to live in such an unsafe place. In the next scene, we see the couple leaving the city and moving to a quiet suburban neighborhood. Evan is a bit worried about paying the mortgage, but Jessica assures him that they will be fine, as she will work on new projects. After moving their belongings, the couple takes a break to rest, when they suddenly hear a doorbell ring. It turns out to be their neighbor, Simon, who is dressed like he's stepped straight out of the 1950s. He offers them a bottle of wine as a welcome gift, and boldly kisses Jessica's hand. When asked about his profession, Simon reveals that he's a professor of men's studies at a local university. Jessica begins to laugh at the thought of such a course, but when she realizes he's serious, she immediately apologizes. The next day, Evan goes to work, while Jessica, who is a graphic designer, sits down at her computer to dive into her project. Just then, she receives a phone call from her friend Oscar, who asks how the suburban life has been treating her. It turns out the two are part of an online community that obsessively discusses unresolved crime mysteries during their free time. The two then begin discussing some juicy leads on a case they've been investigating, and soon lose track of time. In the next scene, Evan comes home after a long day at work, but Jessica is still chatting with Oscar, so she quickly hangs up the call. But when Evan learns that Jessica didn't even get started on work, and spent the entire day chatting with Oscar, he becomes furious. He reminds her of how she promised to help pay the mortgage, which is why they moved here. Jessica realizes her mistake, so she apologizes to him and says she will start working soon. The next morning, Jessica notices Simon leaving his home, so she hurriedly approaches him to thank him for the wine. She also apologizes for laughing at his course, but he doesn't seem to mind. Jessica then invites him to dinner on Thursday, to which the man eagerly agrees. The scene then cuts to the dinner, where Evan and Simon are seen preparing a barbecue outside. But then, when Jessica joins them wearing a vintage skirt, Simon stares at her with a creepy intensity. Evan then reveals that he does most of the cooking in the house, although Jessica is very good at making rhubarb pie. However, Simon does not appear to approve of this, stating that he comes from a traditional household, where his father provided and his mother cooked. The couple then asks if he's seeing someone, to which Simon responds that he had an ex, who cheated on him years ago, but he's now single. Later that night, Jessica tells Evan that she thinks Simon is lying about seeing someone since she smelled a woman's perfume on him. But Evan doesn't think much of it, and says it might just be a fancy cologne. The couple then proceed to be intimate, but we see Simon creepily watch them from his house with binoculars. The following morning, Jessica is doing some gardening work when she notices Simon arriving home. She runs over to ask him if he has a hefty gardening tool, because her trowel isn't strong enough. The man says he doesn't have any, and Jessica notices his large amount of groceries and asks if he is making dinner for someone. But Simon denies it and says he hates shopping, so he buys a lot of food at once. That night, Jessica informs Evan that Simon is very weird, and she thinks he is probably hiding something. However, Evan is annoyed by this, and accuses her of turning everything into a mystery to be solved. He claims he is working a job he hates so she can feel safe in this place, but it seems like she won't feel safe anywhere. The couple now begins arguing, but they're interrupted by Simon, who has brought a shovel for Jessica to borrow. The next day, Jessica goes to Simon's house to return the shovel, but he's not home, so she peeks through the windows. Later, she calls Oscar and talks about how her neighbor, Simon, is so weird, and how he has his drapes drawn all the time, like he's hiding something. However, Oscar says she might be reading too much into it, and reminds her that being weird isn't a crime. The scene then cuts to Simon, who checks his home cameras, and becomes happy to notice that Jessica had dropped by. Up next, he calls her, and asks her to come over, claiming he has found something that she would like. Jessica agrees, and soon arrives at his place, where Simon shows her an old-fashioned dress that he bought for her. This makes Jessica extremely uncomfortable, and she refuses to accept the gift, so he shows her the CCTV footage of her peeking into his house. Here, he suddenly claims that when he saw her like that, he realized that she wanted to be with him. This makes Jessica extremely scared, but before she can escape, sometime later, Jessica suddenly wakes up in a 1950s-styled room and meets a woman named Robin, who is wearing a vintage dress. Jessica freaks out and tries to get out, but finds a code at the door, which only Simon knows. Robin then informs her that they're in Simon's basement, and assures her she's safe down here. Poor Jessica begins screaming, but Robin warns her that no one can hear her, and that screaming will only make Simon angrier. Meanwhile, we see that Simon is at Jessica's house, where he is picking up her clothes. Moments later, Evan shows up at the house, so the creepy guy quickly hides and pulls out a gun in case. But fortunately, Evan doesn't notice him and heads upstairs, during which Simon sneaks out of the house. Returning to Jessica, she is still trying to find a way out when Simon returns, and says she has to clean up all the mess. Jessica takes this moment to run away from there, but unfortunately, she finds another steel door upstairs. The terrified woman screams for help, but Simon warns her that no one can hear her, and she has no choice but to come back. When they return to the basement, Simon states that it is much easier for her to accept that this is where she is meant to be. Jessica notices some knives, so he says that he can kill her if she wants, but she will die down here with him. Meanwhile, Evan thinks Jessica is mad at him, so he leaves her a voicemail to apologize for being rude before. He then checks her desk, and notices that she has left her phone behind, which he finds very odd. Back in the basement, the women get to know each other, and Robin reveals to Jessica that Simon used to be her professor. It turns out Robin has been living here for years, so Jessica feels bad for her and says they need to leave. But Robin refuses, as she has accepted this reality as her fate, and has come to love Simon wholeheartedly. Sometime later, Simon returns to the basement with vintage clothes for Jessica, and Robin feels a bit bad that he didn't buy her anything. Simon has even bought an old typewriter for Jessica, as she once mentioned she wanted to write a book. But Jessica isn't impressed by this, and says that she doesn't know what he did to Robin, but she will never be like her. Moments later, they hear a doorbell ringing, so Simon switches on an old TV that has access to CCTV and sees Evan at the front door. Jessica begins screaming and banging on the door, but Simon reminds her that the place is soundproof. He then heads upstairs to greet Evan, who is worried because he can't find Jessica anywhere. Simon explains how he spoke on the phone with Jessica earlier, but she sounded a bit upset. Meanwhile, the two women watch all of this on TV, and Robin tells Jessica that part of her life doesn't exist anymore, and she must accept that. Later, a worried Evan returns home, where he notices the couple's picture being smashed and thrown away in the dustbin. He also notices that Jessica has taken all her clothes and other essentials, which worries him. Later that night, Tyler arrives to meet Evan, and they discuss the sudden disappearance of Jessica. Tyler asks if she was seeing someone, to which Evan recalls her detective wannabe friends, and says she was especially close to a guy named Oscar. The next morning, Tyler and Simon go to meet Oscar in the city, and ask if he knows anything about Jessica's whereabouts, but the guy has no idea. He says that Jessica was very suspicious of their new neighbor, Simon, whom she found extremely weird. But Evan thinks she was just exaggerating things, and they leave after Tyler urges Oscar to call him if he finds anything. Next, Tyler and Evan go to Simon's place to question him about Jessica, and he also claims to have no idea of her whereabouts. Tyler then states how Jessica was suspicious of him having someone else in the house because of the extra groceries. And so, Simon cunningly says that he had invited one of his grad students that night, which he wanted to keep a secret. Evan thus apologizes for bothering him, after which the two men leave. Following this, Simon returns to the basement and orders Jessica to give him her email and password. She reluctantly obliges, and sometime later, Evan gets an email from Jessica's account, in which she says that she has decided to leave him. She states how she has found a better understanding man, and says it's probably better for both of them. This leaves Evan very distraught, and he can't believe that after 6 years of being together, Jessica would abruptly end things like that, over an email. Meanwhile, in the basement, Simon finally succeeds in forcing Jessica to wear a 1950s housewife dress. She then calls him insane, so the deranged man hurts her by twisting her wrist, and asks her not to talk to him like that anymore. The next day, Jessica looks like a perfect 1950s housewife, and even cooks a steak for Simon. He compliments her appearance, and Robin seems to be jealous of the new girl. Simon then gives a knife to Jessica to carve the steak, and she takes it. But then all of a sudden... Sometime later, the deranged man wakes up and finds himself tied to a chair. Jessica begins hitting him and demands the code for the door, but Simon says he'd rather die than give it. Frustrated, Jessica grabs a knife and threatens to cut him, but at this moment, Robin rushes in and attacks her. The two women begin fighting, which gives Simon enough time to break free. He then grabs Jessica by the neck and reminds her that this is her fate now, and it's best if she accepts it. That night, Jessica is crying in bed when Robin approaches and apologizes for betraying her. She says she had to do it, or else Jessica would have ended up like Megan. A shocked Jessica asks who Megan was, so Robin says she was the girl before her. It turns out Megan tried to run away multiple times, so Simon made Robin kill her, which she can't go through again. The next day, Evan notices Simon with a wound on his head and asks what happened, so the psycho man claims to have been in a bike accident. Simon then invites him to watch a baseball game at his place, to which Evan agrees. Later, we see the two of them watching the game, and the women from the basement also notice them on TV. Jessica desperately tries to get his attention by making noise with a broom, but when Simon pulls a gun, she gets scared and stops. Sometime later, Simon approaches Jessica and menacingly tells her that if she tries anything clever again, he will brutally murder Evan. He then invites her to sleep with him, and poor Jessica has no other choice but to comply. The scene then cuts to 6 weeks later, where Evan has decided to accept that Jessica is gone and puts up the house for sale. Meanwhile, in the basement, Robin is furious with Jessica for spending 3 nights in a row with Simon, even though it wasn't her turn. That night, Simon and Robin are in bed, and she tells him how Jessica confessed that she is still in love with Evan. She further says Jessica is planning to escape again and asks for her help. Simon is stunned to hear this, and thanks her for telling him before going to confront Jessica. He angrily tells her how much he hates lying, since lying is a cancer that must be cut out. But then...
And cancers need to be cut out.
This horrifies Jessica, while Simon assures her he did it all for her, since Robin would have hurt her. He then proceeds to dismember the dead body, while Jessica cries and screams in her room. The next day, Tyler gets a call from Oscar, who has found some crucial information about Simon. It turns out that at every place he taught, at least one student went missing. The bizarre part is that Simon was found to have had inappropriate relationships with those students, and was expelled before the girls disappeared. Upon hearing this, a stunned Tyler doesn't waste any time, and proceeds to go to Simon's place. The psychopath lets him inside, after which Tyler begins exploring the house, and also asks questions about his student, Robin. Simon doesn't deny that he dated her, but insists he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Tyler soon reaches the wine cellar, which actually leads to the basement, while Jessica watches the whole thing on TV. Up next, Tyler asks Simon about his other missing student, Megan, but the professor claims not to know anyone by that name. And then, Simon does this.
You know, the thing with guys like you is that you think you're ahead.
After dumping the body far away, Simon returns home and apologizes to Jessica for killing the officer. But Jessica remains calm and hugs him, saying he did what he had to do. Days later, Evan finally manages to sell the house, and Simon comforts him, saying it's probably for the best. Later, Simon arrives to see Jessica, and takes her out of the basement for the first time after being held captive. They go upstairs, where Simon gets ready with the gun, but she doesn't scream or try to escape. He then takes her to the window and shows the sold sign on her former house. Simon asks how that makes her feel, to which Jessica says she feels bad for Evan, and suggests giving him a farewell gift. And so, Simon says he will give him a bottle of wine that he likes, to which Jessica agrees. Afterwards, Simon goes to see Evan with the wine, and they drink together while saying their goodbyes. While Simon prepares to leave, Evan notices a lipstick mark on his collar, which leaves him shocked because Jessica used to do that to him when they were together. The next morning, Jessica tells Simon that she wants to bake a rhubarb pie for him today, to which the man excitedly agrees. Elsewhere, Evan is preparing to leave the house when he gets a call from Oscar, who says he just heard about Tyler's murder. He explains that before the incident, he spoke to Tyler about Simon, and the officer must have gone to visit him. This leaves Evan shocked, so he decides to confront the suspicious man. Later, Jessica and Simon are enjoying the rhubarb pie in the basement, and she makes him eat with his hands. They are soon alerted by a loud siren, and it turns out Evan has sneaked inside the house, and is desperately looking for Jessica. He soon notices the smell of rhubarb pie, and becomes convinced that Jessica is being held captive there. This makes Simon furious, so he threatens to punish Jessica later. In his haste, he types the door combination with fingers smeared from the rhubarb pie. Afterwards, Simon approaches Evan and begins attacking him, while in the basement, Jessica desperately tries to guess the code based on the smudged numbers. Upstairs, Simon overpowers Evan, and is about to finish him off, right when Jessica figures out the code and rushes to attack him. The two now begin fighting, and she challenges him to kill her, but Simon refuses and vows that he'll make her wish she were dead. Just then, she grabs a cleaner and sprays it in his eyes. She then hits his head with a fire extinguisher, but when she is about to finish him, Evan asks her not to. The scene then shifts to a year later, where we see Jessica and Evan happy together. Jessica then heads inside the prison alone and meets with Simon, who thanks her for speaking against his death penalty. But she clarifies that she didn't do that to help him, but she wanted him to live as a prisoner for the rest of his life. Jessica then reveals that she has published a book, in which she wrote about the nightmare she lived through in his captivity. The movie comes to an end as Jessica leaves the prison, while Simon creepily kisses the book she left behind. Thus, we reach the end of this movie. Thanks for watching. If you like the movie, support us. Don't forget to subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next movie. Goodbye.